This photo is going to take me back to school. What memories does it bring back?
I think being a teenager was quite challenging. School wasn't a particularly hateful place. It wasn't a place that I dreaded going to. But the people in school, I realise now, all these years later, they were organised and really quite willing to make my life a misery. So the first time I was punched, I was 10, punched in the face twice. I went to my head teacher, who told me not to worry about it and it wasn't a problem. I used to get my shins kicked in physics, biology and chemistry classes until they bled. So I can vividly remember trying to hide the bleeding with socks. I was kicked downstairs a lot. I'd had Bunsen burners aimed at me when the flame was lit, which was really quite frightening. So things really came to a head when I was 13. I kept having blackouts. I went to a child psychiatrist, paediatricians, lots and lots of tests to try and figure out what was wrong with me, and they concluded in the end it was stress. Things got better very briefly, and then things really from that point on went from bad to worse because I had sort of temporarily stood up to them. They felt then as if they could get away with more. So there were a couple of things where once in AP lesson, a group of girls actually who were involved in the bullying took my clothes, wrapped them around a urinal, and then urinated on them. Another occasion where I was basically held on the school field, screamed at, shouted at, told not to leave. I ended up messing myself, going to the toilet because I couldn't leave and I was too frightened to leave. The most cruel thing about being bullied is the mental cruelty. The saying of sticks and stones will break my bones, names will never hurt me. Well, names do hurt. There were points when I was about 14, 15 and 16 where I would have happily have not been here anymore. It's quite a hard thing to admit, but I know that I would have happily have not been here. I know that the internet was a new thing then for anyone watching this, and I know that the equivalent of Googled taking my own life. That's something I've never actually spoken about before. And the reason for it was because that day I had been spat at. And that was the first time I was spat at by anybody. And I was in year 9, and it was around an options day, and it was to do with which course I was picking. And someone said to me, if you're going to be in my class, you can look out, or wherever it was. And it was towards the end of the day. And when I say spat at, I mean, wrenched down, phlegm, and just spat all over my face. And I can remember walking into a French teacher's class and saying, what happened? I would not say a word. I was simply too terrified. And I went home and thought, right, if that happens again tomorrow, I'm not sure I can deal with that. And therefore it's probably best if I'm just not here anymore. And that was pretty grim, and grim doesn't really cover it. And it probably sounds really strange saying that someone spat at you and the response is that, but you have to remember that was based on, by that point, maybe 4 or 5 years of walking into school every day. And I said I lived around the corner from my school, literally 3 or 4 minutes away, and my head wanting to go into school because I loved school, but my legs wanting to go the other way because I knew that what would come from the minute I walked into the school, whether it was someone's leg being put out in front of me so that I'd fall, then I'd get a good kicking afterwards. But on that particular day, I was spat at, made to feel utterly irrelevant. And I just thought, actually, maybe it's just easier not to bother. I went to university, and I remember going into uni and dreading it. I can't tell you how much I dreaded it. Because I thought I was going to have the same things that happened to me in university as comprehensive, and it was like a revelation. And like I said, I had lots of brilliant teachers who tried really hard, and sometimes it's just out of their control in tackling lots of the bullying that I faced, and I don't blame any of them for it for a second. But it is about turning the negative into that positive. I think it's made me a better person. I think I am calmer, less judgmental. I'm certainly not an angry person by any stretch, because I see what anger did to me. And I think now I try and use that in the best way that I can, and say to people that, okay, you know, 1, bullying is not okay. 2, you shouldn't suffer in silence. 3, you should always speak. You should always talk to somebody. Someone will always listen. And I wish I knew that at the time. And 4, you can get through it. You can survive it. You can then manage it, and you don't forget. I've never forgotten. There are things I've sort of put in a box at the back of my head and, you know, sort of throw away the key. But you don't forget, but you do manage it, and it does get easier. Having another peer, you know, peer-to-peer intervention means that someone may have stepped in, and people did step in with me at different points, and it got easier because of it, because you realised that you weren't alone, and not everyone was this sort of, you know, enraged bully. So the more that the Diana Award can do that work, then the better, because young people must feel as if they can turn to others, get help from people in their year groups or just in the school generally, and the more that can happen, all the better. In the UK, 10 million children are going back to school this September. Over half of them will be affected by bullying. You can change that by helping us train an anti-bullying ambassador in every school. Head to backtoschool.antibullyingpro.com to find out more. This campaign is powered by the Diana Award.